very much. Okay, very good. So today we are going to continue in our study of the prophet Zechariah. And this is going to, I think, be 2 weeks that we're going to talk about this chapter. And the reason is because there's a lot going on in this chapter, I think, that will help us and encourage us in our walk with the Lord. And because the subject matter falls into several nice categories, that I don't want to shortchange any of the important lessons to learn by just making sure that we get through it. So, for those of you that may be visiting or are unaware, the prophet Zechariah, right, is one of the last of the prophets in the Tanakh. Tanakh, by the way, stands for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, otherwise known as the Torah or Law of Prophets and Writings. Okay, and in fact, there's even a place in the Brit Hadashah where Yeshua refers to it that way, and that's how it is understood in the Jewish world. I know that oftentimes, if you're visiting us today, that you hear the term Old Testament. Well, we don't use that terminology because it often is associated with antiquated, of no use, secondhand store, book loft, I don't know what, but I don't know why I just said that. But anyway, something that's just old and maybe nice and helpful, but not vital. And so we don't use that terminology here. So Zechariah is toward the very end, and the reason for that, it's even toward the very end in your not just chronologically, but even in the text, okay? Because he lived and wrote after almost everything was done in that period of time. The time period is actually called, in the Jewish world, it's called the beginning of the Second Temple period. The beginning of the Second Temple period. And I think that's very helpful terminology because Second Temple. It reminds us this did not take place while Solomon's temple was standing. That means it did not take place during the time of Jeremiah or Isaiah, or Ezekiel or Joel or Hosea or all those prophets, right? Or during the time of 1st and 2nd Kings, even. So very, very important for us to get that, because as we have said, the people, his situation was not, even though it was centuries ago and it was unique to his time, there were certain features of that period of time and why he was writing, as well as the prophet Haggai as well, and Malachi. There was some certain similarities to the days in which we are living. And that is that when some of the people returned from the Babylonian captivity, they didn't all come back. The majority of people stayed in Babylon. And from this time on, the majority of Jewish people lived outside of the land. The majority of the Jewish people lived outside of the land. That was not the case before. That was not the case during the earlier period of time, really from the time of Joshua all the way to like Zedekiah. The people lived in, almost all the people lived in the land. Now it was a whole different ball game. Now it was a minority or a remnant of the people who returned. And they returned with their leaders. Zerubbabel, who was the civil leader, he was descended from David, but he was not a king, kind of a puppet governor from the point of view of the Persians, and Joshua, who was the high priest, who was a Zadokite high priest. He was descended from the priesthood and ultimately back to Aaron. So this small group of people returned. They had great expectations that they were going to be like the tip of the spear, and all those promises that had been written about in the prophets were now going to come to pass, and it's going to be great. And they come back, and it's a mess. They come back, and their expectations are dashed. They're disillusioned. There are people living in the land that are giving them a really rough time of it. They're being harassed. They can't rebuild the temple. And so they're kind of depressed over it, kind of saddened over it. And God raised up these prophets to remind the people who they were, and to remind the people of the power of God, and to remind the people that although the situation had changed, and it clearly wasn't the way it used to be, they are still Israel, they are still the chosen people. Don't worry what it all looks like, but that God is still the God of Israel, and even though their present time may be difficult, God has not left them, He has not forsaken them, and the fact is that their presence in the land represents a glorious future. Well, that sounds familiar, right? And this was the time that he was writing. So Zechariah, he tells the people that they need to repent. That's the beginning of the book, as we know. And then there's a series of visions that he has that are all designed to challenge the people and encourage the people. Last time we looked at, a couple of weeks ago, we looked at chapter 3. Chapter 3, if you remember, that's about, Joshua, the high priest, was being accused and dressed in dirty clothes and was not eligible really to fulfill his role of the priesthood of the high priest. And then God, has his clothes changed, representing the forgiveness of sin, and that God is faithful, and that he has not forsaken them, and that the priest himself is a symbol of God's love for the people and of the future, the branch who will come. And we talked about how it all points to the coming of the Messiah. Now here in chapter 4, it's a little bit different. It's not so much in chapter 4 about how the people are sinful, and that God is, he's still faithful and forgiving them. This one's much more about God's presence and God taking the initiative and God bringing the events to pass and encouraging them that way. We may be familiar a little bit with this chapter because it's the Hanukkah chapter, right? This is the Haftorah portion during Hanukkah, and it became applied to the cleansing of the temple a few hundred years after Zechariah lived at Hanukkah. But what we'll see here is that it applies certainly to all of us. Okay, so we see now in chapter 4, we read here, "Then the angel who was speaking with me returned and roused me as a man who is awakened from his sleep." This was a rough night of sleep for Zechariah. One vision after the other, right? Can you just imagine the next day? It was like, oy, what a night I had, right? But God was speaking to him some very important things. And he said to me, "What do you see?" And I said, "I see, and behold, a lampstand." By the way, I'm just going to pause here and just observe something in the text. One of the things that you see in these visions kind of reminds me of Yeshua, is that every time, or I should say every time, many times, when Yeshua was trying to make a point, he did not just say, "Sit down, or something I'm going to tell you," and then blow their ears off. You know what I'm saying? He continued to ask them questions. right? And here you see that in these visions, that Zechariah has a vision, and then you don't just read, and then the angel just told him everything that it was. Continually, he's asked, what do you see? What a great lesson in how to teach, right? In asking questions and interacting. Really very good. Anyway, he said to me, what do you see? And I said, I see and behold a lampstand, all of gold, and its bowl on the top of it, and its 7 lamps on it, with 7 spouts belonging to each of the lamps. Right? That's 49. That's a lot of spouts. That's a lot of light, right? That's a lot of light. And 2 olive trees by it, one on the right side of the bowl and the other on the left side. And then farther down, we'll see that there's like these, there is like a little PVC, a tube going from the 2 olive trees into the lampstands. And so there's a tremendous amount of light and oil all over the place here, okay? You don't want to miss the point, right? That's the point, that there is this never-ending supply of oil, and that is the vision. He said, then I answered and said to the angel who was speaking with me, what are these things, my Lord? Notice Zechariah was not intimidated to say, I don't want to ask a question because it might be stupid, right? He said, I don't know, what is it? I don't understand. See? Another great learning lesson there. So the angel who was speaking with me answered and said to me, do you not know what these are? And so he says, no. Now, maybe he also said, that's why I asked the question. Okay? No, my Lord. And so let's stop there for a second. So we know, going back to, in fact, the Torah portion from last week, it began with, getting the olives all crushed up for the oil for the lampstand in the tabernacle, right? And then in the temple. And that is, by the way, represented by our Ner Tamid, right? The light that does not go out. When we leave here, now don't get mad at me, some of you. We leave a light on. And it represents, and it's always above the Aron HaKodesh. It's above the ark, okay? It's not just like anywhere, right? It's above the ark. And it reminds us of the presence of God. And again, it is this reminder that just as the cloud and fire were with the people in the wilderness, so God is with us. And not only on Shabbat morning from 10:30 to who knows when, but all the time. Sadly, in many synagogues, much is made about the beauty of the Ner Tamid without ever thinking about what it is, and what it represents. The presence of God, the care of God, the fact that, God never leaves or forsakes us or that. So we even have that here. So it was really very, very important. And so here they were struggling with the rebuilding of the temple. And so without the temple, there was, God made us physical human beings. So we need to see things and have it like tactile experiences of holding something or seeing something. And so without the temple, it was very hard for them to wrap their head around the fact that God was really still with them. Even though Jerusalem was a mess, the majority of the people were in Babylon, there were enemies in the land, but here Zechariah has this vision of the light, of the never-ending light of the lampstand. And everybody knew Zechariah knew, the people knew, that this was not a Hanukkah menorah. This was not, as I think I said in a recent meeting, it's not Barnabas Collins walking around, right? Anybody remember that? Right? It is the holy menorah or lampstand representing the presence of God and the protection of God in the temple. And this, of course, is like the Star Wars version of the lampstand. This is not just the lampstand. That was 7. This is like 7 and then 7 coming out of it. And then you have these, 2 olive trees. And you have these pipes coming to all the lamps. It must have looked very complex and grandiose and huge and involved. And that was what it was supposed to represent. This fact that the oil is overflowing and the light is overflowing, and that God is ever with you in a way that is unbelievable, that is magnificent, and wondrous, as we might say. And so what does it mean? Okay, this is what now we see what Zechariah saw. Now it's, what does it mean though? So he answered and said to me, right, when he said, remember he says, what is this? And he said, don't you know what these are? No, my Lord. Then he said to me, okay, here's what it is. This is the word of the Lord to Zerubbabel, saying, this is the Lord telling you, Zerubbabel, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. What are you, O great mountain? Before Zerubbabel you will become a plain, and he will bring forth the top stone with shouts of grace, grace to it. Okay, so now this is what it means. Not by might nor by power. Okay? Might and power represent all of the resources and abilities, whether we're talking about building materials, creativity, ingenuity, whatever, of the people. But by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. And so this was a great word, both of encouragement and challenge to Zechariah and to the people. That, this is not going to happen because you know what you're doing. This is not going to happen because you're organized. This is not going to happen because you have great and new interesting ideas. This is not going to happen because you have a gift of administration. This is not going to happen even because you have a heart and passion for it and a vision for it. No, it is going to happen because I'm going to make it happen. That I'm going to make it happen. Not just I'm going to empower you to be able to do it. I'm going to make it happen. It's my work. It is my temple. I will make it happen. Yes, your responsibility is to be the conduit to make it happen. Yes, you need to be faithful and all of that, but filled up with me, because by the Ruach it will take place. And of course, we know in the Tanakh there are several passages that speak about the power of the Ruach, right? I'm sure you can think of some. One was right there in the beginning of Breshit, in the beginning of the Bible, the beginning of Genesis, right? The Ruach created. The Ruach was involved in creation, right? The power of God, of course, in creation. The Ruach, of course, from there's a Song of Moses, right? In Exodus chapter 15, in verse 8, and at the blast of your nostrils, The waters were piled up. The flowing waters stood like a heap. The deeps were congealed in the heart of the sea. Okay? The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall be gratified against them. I will draw out my sword, and my hand shall destroy them. Thou didst blow with thy wind, the ruach, right? The sea covered them. They sank like lead. Great statement. In the mighty waves. It is not just, God did not just make it windy, like a windy day, like blowing leaves to the other side of the street. Okay? That it was the Ruach, it was the power of God. It was God himself via the Ruach, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit of God, who did these great, powerful works. We also read later on in the prophet Ezekiel, in this 37th chapter, another vision, the vision of a valley of dry bones. You end up with a dead body. And then what is it? God breathes life. The breath of God is the Ruach. You see? And so in creation, in resurrection, in redemption, we see the power of God. So this was not a foreign idea. We read about the Spirit in a lot of places in the Tanakh, right? So this was no foreign concept to them, and they knew that the Spirit here was not simply an apparition, was not a feeling, like the feeling of God, not by your power, but I'm gonna make you feel empowered. No, God is going to do the work, but of course in and through the people. And so, very important, that we understand that, right? And so, when we think about Hanukkah, right? That's why this is the Hanukkah Haftorah portion, and we even sing about it and talk about it. That we have this great miracle that happened there, right? That the Maccabees were able to recapture the temple. And they were able to cleanse the temple and dedicate the temple, and of course, this is where the story of the oil is really very, very interesting, right? Is that the tradition is that the holiday is 8 days long because there was only a little bit of oil. To dedicate the temple to God, they needed oil. They needed to light the Ner Tamid. They needed to light the lampstand. How can you dedicate the temple without a lit lampstand? You can't. And so there was only a little bit of oil, and it was going to take 8 days to get more oil, but that little bit of oil miraculously lasted for 8 days. And the point there is this very point. By my Spirit, God was saying to the people that I'm the one who's doing this work. And what's interesting is that this story of the oil was very important to our ancestors, very important to the rabbis. You only read about it in the Talmud. And it's just, a lot of times when people talk about the Pharisees or the rabbis or the Talmud, it's like very negative. People speak kind of negatively. But the rabbis were burdened that the people would not recognize that the great story of Hanukkah was a great work of God and not just Judah Maccabee. And so this story of the oil became the story of Hanukkah. And when Marcy was growing up, and as I was growing up, and when Mara was growing up, or Lenny, or Jeff, or anybody else who grew up Jewish. That's the story. That's when we talk about oh, well, this is what it says in Maccabees. I remember I was this is 20 years ago. And 25 years ago, maybe, I was sitting in a class at Ohio State. And Dr. Meyer was teaching a class on Jewish history. And we were reading in the Maccabees about this time, not about Hanukkah per se, but about the time period. And it was a real eye-opener to see that, it says there that, they wanted to recreate Sukkot and all that. My only point in saying that here now is that Jewish people don't grow up knowing that. You grow up knowing about the oil lasting for 8 days. And it was the heart of the rabbis that we would remember that it was the work of God. It was the work of God. That is where that all comes from. See, and to remind us of that. Now, in the Brit Hadashah, there are a variety of passages that talk about, the power of God and the Ruach. For example, in the New Covenant Scriptures, in 1 Peter chapter 4, we read this, if I can find it here. Sorry. Okay. In verses 10 and 11, I think it is. Yeah. You see here, as each one has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Whoever speaks, let him speak as it were the utterances of God. Whoever serves, let him do so by the strength which God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Yeshua the Messiah, to whom belongs the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Amen. The point of these verses, sometimes what we end up doing with verses like this is we do the opposite of what they're trying to do, of what Peter is. We do the opposite. What do we do in the opposite? I'm speaking to you. I'm speaking the voice of God. And what you end up only doing is drawing attention to yourself. The point of this passage is that when you speak, remember that it is God who's doing God who is communicating. You are the conduit. You're the vessel that God's using. It's not about you, and it's not about how great you are, how close you are to God, and all that. But that's what ends up happening, right? No, it is this word saying that may God be glorified through you, because the power comes from you. The ability to serve comes through God. And when we speak, coming through, as it is, God is speaking. I had maybe you've heard of him, years ago, Erwin Lutzer. Everybody ever hear of Erwin Lutzer? He was my teacher. They tell you how old I am. Before he was the pastor at Moody Church, he taught at Moody Bible Institute. And I had him for Bible study methods, kind of like a homiletics kind of thing, And he told us, this was to encourage us. He said, I have sat through thousands of bad sermons. Bad, woo! But he said, whenever I have had the right heart, I've always been able to get something out of it. I've always been able to get something out of it. That, even if I've heard it 1,000 times, and you know how that is, sometimes you hear something 1,000 times, 1,001, it's like, oh, wow, I never really thought about it that way, right? And so that was really interesting. I could apply that in a lot of ways, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail. I'll save it for a leadership meeting sometime. But the fact is, it was a great word, that it is the power of God that's at work. There's a lot of things we can do to aid the presentation. Yes, indeed, no doubt. But it is God who is doing the work. That's what Peter is saying. In other words, not by might, not by power, not by your ingenuity, not by your intellect, but by my Spirit, says the Lord of hosts. Another passage is in 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians. Okay. In chapter 1. In verses 8 and 9. For we do not want you to be unaware, brethren, of our affliction, which came to us in Asia, that we were burdened excessively, beyond our strength, so that we despaired even of life. You know, have we ever felt that way a little bit? You know, even as believers, even, that despair, like, my expectations are dashed, or people don't understand me, or I thought parenting would not be like this, he or she said at 3:45 a.m., right? This is too hard. I can't do it. Or maybe it's the job or lack thereof. You know, whatever it is, we despaired even of life. Isn't that something that, I can't get, Paul says this, right? The one who said rejoice all the time. Think on good things all the time. Paul was not Mr. Rogers. Okay? Just remember that. If you don't get anything out of anything else, you'll get that. Right? Right? Beyond our strength, we despaired even of life. Indeed, we had the sentence of death within ourselves. Isn't that it? The sentence of death within ourselves. Not the sentence of death that the Roman authorities were. That within ourselves, it's like we are of despair. We might as well just die. Now, you know what's interesting about that is 2 Corinthians is one of the last letters that Paul writes. And we're on Tuesday nights and on Wednesday mornings in our Chavurah groups there, we're going through 1 Thessalonians, which was one of the first letters that he writes. And one of the main differences between 1 Thessalonians and 2 Corinthians is in 1 Thessalonians, Paul is sure that the Lord is returning at any minute, and he will be alive when the Lord returns. He says, the dead in Messiah will rise first, and we who are alive will be gathered together. He was sure that's how it was going to be. When you read 2 Corinthians, this is the book, this is the letter where he says, I don't know which is better, to live or to die. I'd really rather die and be with the Lord, but I need to stick around for your sake. I don't know how they must have felt about that. It was sort of like the backhand of fellowship a little bit there, you know? But anyway, so when Paul says here, we despaired even of life. Indeed, we had the sentence of death within ourselves. Like he's thinking, it would be better, why don't I just die? You know? Wow. In order, now look what it says at the end of the verse. Indeed, we had the sentence of death within ourselves, in order that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a peril of death, and will deliver us. He on whom we have set our hope, and he will deliver us. And then, of course, he goes on to say, you also joining and helping us through your prayers. That's why this is a 2-week message. But this point of beyond our own strength, not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit. It was true for rebuilding the temple, and it was, by the way, it was true for Elijah. Also in that Haftorah portion. And it is indeed true for us. So the last one is in Ephesians chapter 6. You know that about putting on the armor of God, right? Putting on the armor of God. That we will see next week how this relates to being children of light. Very interesting. This issue of light as it is manifested in our own lives. But right now we're talking about the power of God. And so we see in verse 10, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Be strong in the Lord and the strength of his might. And so we need to be sure that we are walking in the strength of God. We are walking in the power of God. That means that we are praying people. That we are people who really listen for the voice of God within us via the Ruach HaKodesh. We know that the Spirit of God was poured out. And when we embrace Yeshua, the Ruach lives within us. And we'll be talking about that next week. But for right now, may we be encouraged and may we remember that it is the power of God who strengthens us. It is the power of God via the Ruach HaKodesh, via Yeshua who dwells within us, to be able to keep moving forward in life, not just keeping our heads above the water, but being able to complete the task that God has called us to have. And so if we are thinking about, wow, what are we going to do to our building here? Or, wow, what are we going to do in, with our brotherhood or sisterhood, or this is our aspirations for youth, or what we would like our services to be like, or outreach, all of that. Yes, it's great to see how we can accomplish it and put people in the right places to do things. We do that because our understanding is that we are filled with the Ruach, and it is indeed the power of God. And so communally, may we be challenged by this and recognize this and pray this. Indeed, Lord, fill us with your Ruach. Lord, by your power, not just help us to do it. By your power, may we see what you are doing, and may we join up with you in what you are doing. And that was the word to Zechariah, and that is the word to us. Now, as to how that happens, well, next week we will talk more about Zechariah chapter 4. But